I live in a house that's huge and beautiful, but there's one problem. I'm often home alone, and our house had giant windows. I'm a 23-year-old girl that's going to college nearby, and I live at home in order to afford school. My mom and my stepdad have a more fun nightlife than I do, so they often go out of town. We live on a lake in a nice private lake neighborhood that's supposed to be monitored at all times, but often isn't due to lazy patrolmen. In a neighboring town, we have another house, and I used to live in it. We had bought it so that I might live close to college, since it's about 3 streets away. I had a stalker there that would leave gifts, footprints by my window, and letters. I knew who she was. She had been a classmate at my college that wasn't accepting that I had no interest in dating girls. I filed a police report, and we had been called a few times because she had been seen entering our backyard, even though we hadn't been back to the house in a while. I definitely know that gut feeling when I'm being watched. I'm back at our main house due to that experience, and have been here for a few months now. It's 40 minutes away from my other house, and it is extremely difficult to find. We live on a road impossible to find on GPS, and only my closest friends have been out here to visit. 2 weeks ago, I called the cops. I had been home alone sitting upstairs, and I saw a figure in our yard, then heard the doorknob rattling downstairs shortly after. After the cops showed up, 45 minutes later from getting lost, they found no one, and assumed that it was someone trying to break in. Whoever it was definitely saw me because our windows are huge and located everywhere, and I sat right beside 3 windows that are 15 feet by 13 feet. This house was custom built for my mom and stepdad. We have giant windows everywhere, including all the bedrooms. Some of our windows are so big because they previously belonged to an old church, at 17 feet high. Even my bedroom has windows that, luckily, feel blind. But most of our windows are too large for blinds or curtains. Basically, everyone can see into our house, whether they're in our front yard, backyard, in their boat, etc. It doesn't matter. They can definitely see into a big portion of the house, and the house itself is huge. There are 8 doors that I constantly check to make sure they're locked. I have 2 dogs. One of them is an English bulldog. A week ago, I got home and found a frame art print of a bulldog with saran wrap wrapped around it. There was no note and no context to it, so we have no idea who left it. I'm an artist, and I often share pictures of my bulldog, so I feel like it's aimed towards me. We asked all our friends, family, and even neighbors. No one knows who left it. Tonight, I finished some assignments and immediately laid down in bed. After about 20 minutes, I heard knocks on my window. My dog was in the hallway and started barking as soon as it happened. After laying down for 10 minutes, frozen in fear, I got up to see if there was something or someone lurking out in the dark. There wasn't, from what I could tell. This all happened tonight, and I'm still laying here scared. The cops take so long to get out here, and honestly we'll probably get lost again. And my anxiety is so high, I guess, from my last experience. I've called my older brother and messaged friends to let them know what's going on. All 8 doors are locked. I triple checked them. I honestly don't know why I wrote this out. It sounds silly writing it, but the feeling of being watched is so scary. I was 18, living in college dorms several hours from home, and working as a waitress at an upscale bar and restaurant. I'm short, barely 5 foot, so I'm used to people being creepy and trying to intimidate me now. But as an 18-year-old whose father tried to protect her from the world, and had been raised in a tiny, friendly town, it never occurred to me to be scared of the people who lurk in the dark. We had plenty of regulars, several of whom I became close with during my years working there, and a few of the frequent diners learned my name and general facts about me, since I'm generally pretty open about who I am. One such man was tall, lanky, and several decades older, appearing to be in his mid-50s. Joe. Joe was kind, a good man with a generous nature, who owned a local shoe shop. The second time I was his waitress, he gifted me a pair of slightly worn work shoes, insisted that I accept them. Because of his kindness and the way that he carried himself, people of all types flocked to him, and one of them became the first man outside of my family that I feared. Joe came in with his younger brother, about the same height, slightly bulkier build, and not unattractive, as I recall. But his eyes unsettled me. In high school, I fancied myself a bit of a writer, but nothing in my vocabulary then or now could help me describe how unsettling his gaze was. It seemed dead, lifeless, but I assumed I was simply nervous. Joe was a good man, and his brother was probably less carefree, more intense. The two dined together a few times in the coming weeks, but while Joe would normally request me as a server, he asked our host to assign one of the other servers to his table after the first time. Then, one night, Joe's brother came in alone and requested me by name, and I was happy to oblige. For the first time, he seemed relaxed, energetic, charismatic. He was interesting, with a quick wit and a story for every topic I could throw at him. By the end of my shift, I assumed that he just had a hard time relaxing with his brother, and that may have been true, but through the laughter and charisma, his eyes never once seemed kind. They remained, through it all, lifeless. Eventually, it was time for me to leave, but he was still there, still expecting service. My manager offered to take over the table. He made sure I get the tip, but it was common knowledge that I had an early morning class and likely had to do my homework. I jumped at the chance, but went to finish some closing duties and asked the man, my last table, if he needed anything else. He seemed off. As soon as I said I was heading home, he seemed to harden. His voice was clipped and reminded me of my controlling ex-stepdad, which immediately put me on edge. I've heard the same tone often enough as a little girl, right before being hit. I left immediately. I called my best friend and offered to buy him dinner if he'd meet me at a diner between the dorms and my work. I don't know why I did. I just felt I needed someone to meet me sooner rather than later. Joe's brother hadn't in any way seemed dangerous, outside the tenseness in his voice before I left. But I knew that for most of my walk, which would have been poorly lit, I would have been safer with a companion. We met at the diner. We ate and laughed and headed back to the dorms. A good 25-minute walk. But only 15 or so minutes in, the hairs on the back of my neck seemed to burn. Something was terrifying me, but I don't know why. I told my friend, who brushed it off until he looked behind me and yelled. I turned and saw him. Joe's brother, only a few yards behind us, holding a metal bar. I don't know what they're called, but you see them at construction sites, usually for reinforcement when pouring concrete, and he was holding it hard enough that his knuckles were white. It terrified me to the core, and I screamed. My friend grabbed my arm and we ran, and even though my heart was in my throat, and I couldn't hear anything past the blood roaring in my ears, I swear I could hear his footsteps behind us. We ran to the dorms and I told security, who had us wait in the office while he looked at the cameras in the lot, and called the police. The cops showed up, but did nothing since all he did was scare us. After they left, the security man asked a few more questions and made a comment about a man staying at the entrance door for a bit before walking away. It was assumed that he was homeless, but my blood ran cold. I called in for a few days, and when I went back to work, Joe was in. I told him what had happened, and he nodded. Didn't even seem to question the validity of what I said. His brother, it turned out, had done some time for stalking and sometimes attacking young women, and had even been sent to trial for assaulting and hospitalizing her. Somehow, he managed to avoid jail time for the assault, but Joe said it was only a matter of time before he killed someone. I didn't see Joe often after that, and I never saw his brother after that. The owner of the restaurant was angry for a long time, accused me of running off a regular who had spent a lot of money when he came in. It took a few more scary encounters to make me a little bit more cynical. But to Joe's brother, let's not meet. I didn't even realize how messed up this was at the time, but looking back, I feel kind of lucky. I haven't really had many encounters like this in my life. I'm a chubby male, so creepers tend to leave me alone. When I was 19, I lived in Kentucky, pretty far from my northern Michigan hometown. It was this little town called Pikeville, where there was very little crime. I actually kind of miss it, and I want to go back, but I digress. My family came down to visit me for my birthday that year, and we agreed to meet up at the Hardys in town the morning after they got into town. I got there a lot earlier than them, me being the type to show up 15 minutes early, and them being the type to show up way too late. After I was standing around outside waiting, this guy walks up to me. If you've ever lived in a place like this, you know everyone is super friendly, so it didn't strike me as odd when he started talking to me. During our conversation, all kinds of alarm bells should have been going off. Like, after he found out I went to college, he said that he saw me at a party. This is impossible, as I never once went to a party. When he found out I'm a gamer nerd, he started talking about playing D&D all the time. He started taking sips out of some sort of alcohol bottle. Mind you, it's like 10 a.m. at this point, and he kept offering me some. There were a few other things like this. He started talking about how he lost all his friends because he got into drugs, and I felt a little bad for him. He asked if I wanted to walk around for a bit, and since I knew that my family wouldn't be there for a while, I went. The guy had been talking about how he lost all his friends due to drugs, and I felt bad for the guy. That, coupled with the fact that I hadn't had any encounters like this, and a lack of crime, kind of disarmed that warning part of my brain. We walked and talked for a while, maybe 10 minutes, before I realized that we were in a shady looking part of town. I had never even realized there were shady parts of this small town, but here we were. We stopped in front of a house that looked long abandoned in this dark, narrow, sketchy alley next to it. He started talking about how he knows two girls that live here, and how they like to party and whatnot. He tells me about how DTF they were, and asks if I want to meet them. It was at this point that my common sense finally kicked in. I'm in a terrible part of town, with a sketchy guy that I don't know, who had just been talking about doing hard drugs, and no one knows that I'm here. And now he wants me to go into an obviously abandoned house under the guise of meeting some ladies. I obviously declined his offer, and immediately said I needed to get back as my family was probably waiting. He seemed a little upset about this, and then asked if I could help him move a pool table into his van, which was conveniently parked down the alley. I declined this as well. This is when he began to reach into his jacket pocket. Since those alarm bells started going off, I realized how much this guy looked like he might stab me, and this terrified me. At this moment, my stepmom did the only thing she ever did for me. She called to see where I was. I took this as an opportunity to hastily exit. The creep followed me for like 3 blocks. I don't know what exactly this guy wanted, but it was probably just to rob me. Still, that area has a good amount of disappearances. It is one of the worst areas in the country for human trafficking. I don't know what would have happened if I agreed to help, but I can't help but think that that one scene from Silence of the Lambs where Bill lures a victim into his van. I hope he got the help he needed and is doing better, but I also hope just as much that I never had the misfortune of running into him again.